This is very much my take, which of course is another way of saying that it's entirely correct. But I thought I might just say that to you at the outset. But also, just so you know, in terms of my take, I am, as many of you, probably nearly all of you would know, I sit on General Synod, which we'll get to at the later, is one of the main legislative bodies of the Church of England. I also sit on the Finance Committee of Archbishops' Council, which we'll get to again a little bit later on. And that's the body, there's only 8 or 9 of us, that's the body which oversees the spending of about £240 million a year, which comes in from the church commissioners. We'll come to money later as well. But I'm saying that so that you can see I have some understanding of some of the money flows and of some of the governance structures. I've also been ordained in the Church of England for 16 years, I think it is now, first serving up in Tenbury, and then obviously been here for just over 14 years now, or almost 14 years now. And also, trying to think in terms of putting my credentials out, I'm Rural Dean of the Ledbury Deanery, and I also am Vice Chair of the Board of Finance for the Diocese and sit on its Bishops' Council as well. So because we're a small tin pot diocese, we're lovely, but we are tin pot, you end up serving on all these committees, which has given me a little bit of insight. So this is my take, but most of it, I hope you'll see, is pretty factual. But I'm always ready, if you want, to ask to give my opinion on things as well. So that's all I'm going to say by way of introduction. We'll pray as we begin, and then we'll give all of this. So let us pray. Almighty God, as we consider together this work of the Church of England, I pray that you'd help us never to lose sight of its purpose, which is to enable each of us to encounter you in worship and to spread the news of Christ across this nation. In Jesus' name, amen. So, what is the Church of England? And I am going to start with an enormous caveat right at the beginning, because you'll see that what I end up describing is very much an institution. It's the institution of the Church of England and how it works or doesn't work, the various cogs and all of that. I should be talking about a lot of that. But fundamentally, the Church of England is at its core a church. And the point of a church is rather different from the point of the institution. The church is what happens here on a Sunday morning. It's what happens when we meet each other during the week. The church is, as Paul would call it, the body of Christ gathered together for worship, for encouragement, and for spiritual growth. It's what we encounter in the Acts of the Apostles. Now, all that I'm going to talk about is the Church of England, which is, if you like, a structure. It's one part of the worldwide church. It's the church that exists in this country for those who are members of it. But this isn't really all that I could say about the Church of England. I could focus a lot on how it should be a church and what the point of a church is, but I'm not, because I'm going to be talking about the structures. But I thought it's worth making that caveat at the outset to say, yes, I'm going to talk about bishops and archbishops and synods and all sorts of stuff like that. But fundamentally, we need to understand that the core of the Church of England is the parish. The core of the parish is the parish church. And the core of the parish church is the worship that happens when we come together and gather together to worship. Frankly, everything else is secondary to that. But that is all that I'm going to talk about. Does that make sense? Are we clear on that kind of distinction? So, the beginnings. You will be aware, because you've all read your Ladybird book of the Tudors, or your R.J. Unstid book of the Tudors and the Stuarts, you'll all be aware that the Church of England had its beginnings very much in Henry VIII's lack of heir. Henry VIII was desperate to have an heir. Remember, the Tudors really hadn't been around for that long. He needed to produce an heir to produce succession, and he was frustrated by that lack of an heir. Now, understand, it wasn't Henry's problem. It was all the problems of his wives. He was absolutely impeccable and clearly very fertile man. But nonetheless, his wives were letting him down. And one in particular, the first, Catherine of Aragon, was a particular issue. So although the Reformation was very much gaining ground on the continent, and remember, the Reformation began on October the 31st, we've just had the anniversary yesterday, 1517, when Luther nailed the 95 Theses to the castle door at Wittenberg. Yes, that is the Reformation, but Henry himself actually wasn't so concerned with the Reformation. In fact, Henry didn't really like the Reformation. The reason why to this day our monarchs describe themselves as defender of the faith, you'll see the FD, that's Latin, on the coins that we have. The reason why they have that is that title was first granted to Henry VIII by the Pope. Why? Because he had he was debating with Martin Luther. He wrote in the defense of some traditional doctrines of the Roman Catholic Church. And so he was a son of the Roman Catholic Church. His first intention was not to try and reform the church so that it would look like the church on the continent in Geneva or in Germany or in other places. He rather simply wanted to change the head of the church. Yes, as his reign went on, he did one or two other things. We ended up with a Bible in English, but nonetheless, he was still a son of the Roman Catholic Church. And because the Pope wouldn't allow him to divorce Catherine of Aragon, and by the way, Catherine of Aragon's niece was the Holy Roman Emperor, so he had some clout in all of this. Because the Pope wouldn't allow that divorce, Henry in the end proclaimed himself as head, with advisors, of head of the church so that he could grant the right for the divorce. One of the great what-ifs. What if the Pope had granted the divorce or had annulled the marriage, as was so very common at the time, where I suspect we may well have remained a Roman Catholic country, at least for some time after that, because Henry was in no rush to move away. But nonetheless, he simply at the beginning point, and I'm labouring this point slightly, and you'll see why in a minute, he kept things as they were. There was a strong sense of continuity throughout all of this period, and that remains important for the Church of England, as does the whole relationship that we have with the monarch. That still remains important for the Church of England. Charles is and remains the supreme governor of the Church of England, and that's something that begins with Henry VIII. But we kept things, we kept the buildings. Here you are in one of them. We kept what's known as the threefold order of ministry of bishops, priests and deacons. The first bishops, priests and deacons in the Church of England were the bishops, priests and deacons who had been here before Henry became head of the Church of England. There was no wholesale change. There's one chap, if you look at the list of clergy on the other side of this pillar to me, there's one chap who was here throughout the entire turmoil. He was put in under Henry VIII as Vicar of Fownhope. He was there under he was there under Edward VI, under Mary, under Elizabeth as well. He saw all those changes, but he stayed in post. And I wonder, initially at least, if the good people of Fownhope would have noticed any real difference to begin with. Because the point wasn't that we wanted a reformation, that does come, but it wasn't there initially for Henry. And so we kept, as we said, this threefold division of ministry of bishops, priests and deacons. By the way, the basic distinction is this: the bishops can ordain the clergy, priests and deacons. So they have a controlling hand over who may be ordained, and they have a leadership role. The priests, well, the priests are the ones who can celebrate communion and so on and so forth, and only priests can lead parishes. The deacons nowadays, well, the deacons are normally the first year of people of curates who then will go on to become priests in the second year. But initially, the deacons were there as people who simply served the church. So they would be static, they would be out in the community serving the whole parish and serving the church as well. That's bishops, priests and deacons, and that's what we kept on. So if that's under Henry VIII, then he did do one or two more things, but fundamentally continuity was important. A lot of that changed when Henry died and Edward VI, his young son, took to the throne. He didn't last very long, but he was significant. He gave us a Book of Common Prayer in English. He had advisors around him who were much closer to the Reformation on the continent in Europe than Henry VIII would have been. So we start to find that there's more Protestant thought coming into the Book of Common Prayer, by which I mean things like you should be able to have the services in English. The Bible should be in English. A greater emphasis on teaching, as we still do on a Sunday morning, the congregation in the sermon from the scriptures that are set to be read. The idea of the Mass, the communion service, being somewhat downplayed in its importance, in its role in our salvation, and emphasising that it's our faith that saves us, not turning up to hear the Mass heard. These were some of the emphases that we start to see coming in that are much closer to the Reformers. But Edward VI doesn't last very long, and he dies, and he is succeeded by his sister, Mary I, who takes the church back into the Roman Catholic fold. So we've gone from a kind of mild Reformation, a kind of diet Reformation under Henry. We're going a little bit more thoroughgoing under Edward, and then under Mary, we swing right back under the Roman Catholic fold. And I think, for those who were there at the time, they probably would have seen that as we're returning back to what we know. For many people, they would have thought that this whole business of Henry and then with Edward was a failed experiment, and now we're going back into Roman Catholicism. Remember, England had been a very Roman Catholic country, and if you read wills that are written right into the Tudor period beyond Mary, they are leaving money in them for masses to be said for them after they've died, which is an old Catholic practice. So even those who are writing wills under the more Protestant Tudors that we had were still in their minds expecting that actually things would go back to as they were. So we've got that kind of Roman Catholic, Protestant kind of tension built into the beginning of these things that does stay there throughout really much of the church's history in many ways. You've got this sort of, are we more Catholic or are we more Protestant? We would say of the Church of England that we're Reformed and Catholic. But quite how Reformed and quite how Catholic? What are the various weights that we give to those two ideas continues to be a debate. But what Mary did bring with her, ironically, was the roots of a kind of anti-Roman Catholic understanding that was very much part of this nation's identity because of the many, many people that she burned and were martyred under her reign, which is why she's known as Bloody Mary. Now, yes, Elizabeth I, as many people were martyred for their faith under her reign, Catholics in that instance, but she reigned for far longer. Mary's reign was shorter and therefore was bloodier because in the course of 5 years, all those people were put to death. This fight, he was rather between are we more Reformed or rather more Catholic, carried on into the Stuarts who followed on from Elizabeth I. The Stuarts, even if you look at how they reigned back in Scotland before they came down to have the English throne as well, the Stuarts were fundamentally rubbish as a monarchy. They were very controversial in Scotland. They caused trouble there. They were pretty hopeless when it came, I'm speaking with a certain viewpoint here, they were particularly hopeless when they came to the throne in England. And the actions of the early Stuarts led in the end to a civil war. You'll know about the Cavaliers, you'll know about the Roundheads, you'll know about the Puritans, you'll know about Oliver Cromwell, you'll know all of that. So when we got to the end, or towards the end of the Stuart reign, or at least the reign, and let me get this right, James II, we had acts of toleration. We just wanted a compromise. We just wanted to give up this fighting that had caused so much bloodshed. We just wanted to get rid of all of these religious debates, and we just wanted to say, we'll just be a broad church. We'll just quit the arguments, we'll stop. And so another abiding part of the Anglican character is to be slightly allergic to doctrinal debates, because we've seen where it led to in the Civil War. So the broad church, understanding of the Church of England, I would suggest has its roots in that. So I think this is important, just as I say, to spend a little while on the beginning of the C of E, because it does give us some key elements. A breadth of theological understanding, a continued tension between how Catholic are we and how Reformed are we. The role of the monarch there in the state, all of a sense of strong continuity back with the past, that we are the church of this country, going all the way back to Augustine of Canterbury, who came in 597, or earlier to St. Dufrig or St. Dubricius, who was active in this very area before that. But we have that continuity. All of these emphases come from those opening few centuries of the Church of England and its relationship to the Reformation on the continent. How does that sound? Do I sound convincing at least, even if you're not convinced? Are we happy with that? Well, we can come back to that later if you want. So, how are we organised? So what do we have now? That's the history, moving very much now into the present day. Well, the core component of the Church of England remains the parish in many ways. We'll see how this works up. Yes, dioceses are important. Yes, bishops are important. But the parish is the very centre of the life of the church. And the parish, and this is just because it's confusing, the parish, as in the church parish, you mustn't confuse with the civil parish, which is, the Fownhope Parish Council and the meetings which go on the Rec and other things like that, and all the repairing of the roads. That is very much the civil role of the parish council. We are an ecclesiastical parish. And I say that because very often the boundaries don't overlap. Very often you'll find, so Woolhope, as the rector of Woolhope, parts of my parish are in Putley, just little detached parts of Putley. A few houses of Putley have me as their vicar, even though they're over in Putley, surrounded by the parish of Putley, whether that's the church's parish or the council's parish. So I'm just saying that to show that it's slightly confusing. But the old parish structures that we have, well, they were bequeathed to us by the Roman Catholic Church as we went through the Reformation. This structure that we have is centuries old. Church wardens, there's records of church wardens going back to the 13th century. I think I'm right in saying that the earliest record of a female church warden is back in the 13th and 14th century. We've always had these kinds of structures. We've taken them on. Each parish, though, will have a parish priest. You might call them a vicar, you might call them a rector, you might call them a team vicar or a team rector, you might call them a priest in charge. I'm going to call them a parish priest. You have somebody who is the priest who is responsible for leading that parish, and you'll also have a governing body to govern the life of the church in the area, and that is the parochial church council. Not the parish council, the parochial church council, which is normally called the PCC. And with the PCC, you have the two church wardens as well. The PCCs are a relatively recent invention. The church wardens, as I say, go back centuries. not the individual church wardens, they're very youthful, but the role, the office of church warden goes back centuries. And the PCC and the church wardens are elected by those living in the parish. So we have this kind of local governance. This is the core bit of governance. And crucially, every PCC is an independent charity. By virtue of being a PCC, it is a charity. It has charitable status. And the PCC members are trustees of that charity. And the parish, those of you living in the boundaries here, you have the responsibility for maintaining this building. Nobody else does. The PCC govern that and organise it all. But the liability for the maintenance of the parish church falls upon the parish. Now, I'm saying that because the first bit of misunderstanding is that somehow the state maintains the building. It doesn't. The buildings, in the end, are maintained by the parish, and that means lots of fundraising for the PCC and all the rest of it. And as you can see, a large medieval building like this with Norman elements in the tower here that is grade 1 listed isn't going to be cheap to run. So that's the first thing. Now, sometimes, and this is very much the norm now, and this is all to do with a lack of cash, sometimes you find that a number of parishes are grouped together. So you have a grouping here. So yes, Fownhope, you are an independent parish, but you're also, you know, grouped together with Mordiford, Woolhope and Brockhampton, because I am the parish priest of Fownhope, Woolhope, Mordiford and Brockhampton. Now, you are still separate and independent charities, but you're called a benefice because you share a single priest over all the different parishes. You still have a PCC. You're still independent of Woolhope, you'll be pleased to hear, and Brockhampton and so forth. But nonetheless, that is what a benefice is. It's a number of parishes grouped under a single priest. So if you hear the word benefice, that's normally what it's referring to. So you have the Fownhope parish here, this parish, but also people refer to the Fownhope benefice. And that's basically the parishes that I look after, which includes, as I say, Mordiford, Woolhope and Brockhampton. Then, because the church thinks, you know, we need more hierarchy, surely we need all of that, we then group together a number of benefices into a deanery. So you're with me here, parish, local, benefice of the group of parishes that I look after, and then the deanery. Well, we're in the Ledbury deanery, which goes all the way up to Colwall and up to Cradley. So it's a large area. Brockhampton's probably the southernmost parish in the deanery. We group together as that unit as well. Now, I think it's fair to say that deaneries, nobody really quite knows what to do with them. Initially, they were a meeting of clergy. So we'd meet together to support each other. So each deanery has a rural dean, which is the priest who kind of leads the deanery. I'm the rural dean. But over time, that role was widened. So we also have now a lay chair who works alongside the rural dean. One ordained, therefore, one not ordained, one lay person. And the idea is that the clergy meet together to encourage each other sometimes, and also that the deanery makes some decisions. It helps advise the bishop and the diocese on how things look on the ground and how we might better organise the church on the ground here. That makes sense. An old bishop of Ludlow, we used to have a bishop up in Ludlow in our diocese, used to describe a deanery synod as a group of people waiting to go home, which may give you some understanding of the appetite that many people have for deaneries, but nonetheless they do play an important role in the governance of the church. Overarching all of this, then, is the main geographical unit of the Church of England, apart from the parish, which is the diocese. So the parish is looked after by the parish priest. A benefice is all the parishes looked after by the same parish priest. The diocese is the group of benefices and parishes and all of that looked after by the diocesan bishop. So we are the Bishop of Hereford, we have the Bishop of Hereford rather, we are the Diocese of Hereford, and we run from roughly Ross-on-Wye, well actually Wylesham and Dixon just south of Monmouth. We run then all the way up to, I should have thought of this before, I think Pontesbury, round that kind of way, is probably of Ford, are probably our northernmost parishes, and they're right up there next to Shrewsbury. So fundamentally, we are the parish of the A49, that great spine going up towards Shrewsbury. We don't include Shrewsbury, but we have pretty much everything else in between there and Ross-on-Wye. Each diocese is, and you're going to hear a lot of this, an independent charity. So we have 20-odd thousand independent charities that make up the Church of England, which is a mixture of parishes and dioceses and other little organisations like that. And it also has its own governance, which is why you have all sorts of meetings, many of which I attend, in the diocese, because the diocese is a large charity. It has an income of, well, it's broadish terms, we like to say, we'd like to have an income of about 5 million a year. That's our kind of budgeted figure. So that takes a lot of looking after. What's the key role of the diocese and the bishop? It's to organise the ministry in the boundaries. It decides which parishes are grouped together to make a benefice. It employs the clergy. So it's the bishop who licenses me here to be your parish priest. Yes, you are involved in the interview process and all of that, but the decision of who your vicar is not your decision, it's the bishop's decision. A wise bishop won't put in a parish priest that doesn't get on with the parishes. We don't always have wise bishops. So it's still that role of the bishop is critical because they are the main leader in the area. And they may well have some bishops to help them. So you may have what's known as a suffragan bishop. So not the bishop leading the diocese with the main legal control, but other kind of helper bishops. Or you may have some retired bishops who help out. Because remember, it's only bishops who can ordain people to become priests, and it's only bishops who can do confirmations. So they have a role within the life of the parish as well. But that's the bishops. The diocese is run by the bishop with lots of other bits of governance that we'll come to in a moment. But the diocese is run. Have I kind of explained all this so far? Parishes, benefices, deaneries, dioceses. You can see the Church of England loves a hierarchy. Every part of the hierarchy means that you can become its leader and get a new title. And how exciting is that? That is the basic hierarchy. But there is yet more. So the Church of England is split into two provinces. And a province is a collection of dioceses. We have the province of York, which is centred around York and is the old historic province. And the other old historic province is Canterbury, which is unsurprisingly based around Canterbury. The diocesan bishops of the Diocese of York and the Diocese of Canterbury get to be called archbishops. How exciting is that? And they would be the two main leaders, one north and one south. The Archbishop of Canterbury has no authority in this diocese. The Archbishop of Canterbury can't tell me what to do because the diocese is independent. Remember, we keep coming back to independence. The diocese is independent, but the Archbishop of Canterbury is the one who chairs, along with the Archbishop of York, the House of Bishops as they're known. And as you know, if you chair a meeting, you have great influence over that meeting. And obviously the archbishops have other important roles in the state as well, but I'm just trying to talk about the church at the moment. So the Archbishop of Canterbury sits, if you like, on top of the pyramid, but without much authority. The Archbishop of York just slightly down onto one side, again with not a lot of authority. The diocesan bishops have most of the authority and they sit in the diocese. And then we parish clergy, well, we theoretically do what we're told, but we're independent as well. Are we getting there? Is this making any sense? What about cathedrals? Well, what about cathedrals? What's the point of a cathedral? That's not a rhetorical question. I don't really know. The point of a cathedral initially, and if you're in the Roman Catholic Church, is it's the bishop's church. It's where the bishop's chair, Latin, cathedra, sits. So if you were to go to a Roman Catholic cathedral, you would expect most Sundays to see the bishop taking the service. But that's not how it works in the Church of England. The cathedrals sit to one side of everything, and they are, guess what, an independent charity. So yes, the bishop puts the dean in, but once the dean is in post, the dean's got enormous independence and has an enormous flexibility about what he or she does, in the same way that I have enormous freedom and flexibility on what I do. So a dean normally leads a cathedral. Then there will be normally two, as they're known, residential canons. So you've got a team of 3 clergy effectively leading every cathedral. And then you'll have honorary canons or honorary prebendaries in our case, we have a slight function in the running of the cathedral, very, very slight. We have to elect the new bishop. We have to approve the new bishop when the new bishop is appointed. But this diocese, I think I'm right in saying it was this diocese in around 1910, when Henry VIII, I think I'm right in saying that as well, came to be our bishop. We were so unimpressed with him, we refused to confirm his election. And then a letter from number 10 pointed out gently that could be seen as treason, which is still a capital offence, and maybe best to allow the old chap to come after all. And he came for a little while, wasn't very popular, and went up to York. What do you do with an unpopular bishop? You promote them, get them out the way in that way. In fact, the old story goes in this diocese that the way that we got rid of Bishop Henson was that the county set stopped inviting him to supper. And then eventually he got the message. So there we are. So we have this kind of cathedral sitting to one side kind of issue. What do they do? What's the point of them? It's not entirely clear, but we have them, so we're going to make them work. We run our cathedrals very differently from the Roman Catholics, and the Eastern Orthodox come to that. They have this strange kind of independent hybrid role, but still they are the place where the big services will take place. They're the place where the ordination services will take place. And they are notionally the place where the bishop's throne is, the bishop's chair. But as I say, the deans are very independent and the bishops have to be invited in to come in. How's that? I don't think I've missed anything. Have I missed something? You thought the bishops are chosen by the monarch? Yes, they are. But their election has to be confirmed by the cathedral canons. So I'll come on to that in a minute, but like all these things, everything is kind of true, but hedged around with lots of old tradition. So we've carried on the old pre-Reformation practices of the involvement of cathedrals in the appointing of bishops, even though now the bishops are appointed by the monarch, advised by the Prime Minister. So it's ceremonial nonsense. But that is the core of the Church of England, is often its ceremonial nonsense, and we like it very much. Yes? Yes. So the question was, understand that the bishop needs to be invited to take a service here. That is true. So the bishop won't impose himself on a parish. He waits to be invited in. And those of you who are church wardens and have had the archdeacon's visitation, which we now do about every 3 years, one of the questions there is, when did you last invite your bishop to come into the parish? It would be the same for the deans as well, because the basic rule of thumb in terms of organising services is that's my responsibility and I decide who takes the services. Now, yes, of course, a wise vicar will do that with conjunction with other people and all the rest of it, but in the end the decision remains with the individual parish priest. It's that kind of problem of independence again. So although bishops have lots of power theoretically, in practice so do clergy, and it's quite tricky to do all of that. It's very hard, I'm afraid to say to you, to get rid of your parish priest, because we have all sorts. I legally own this building. I legally own all the parish churches. I legally own the rectory I live in. I am very hard to get rid of because I'm an office holder. I'm not an employee. But this all goes back to arcane laws which have developed over the centuries. Mary? I did say the word archdeacon, and I should have apologised. Yeah, so there is another thing. We'll get to a little bit when we go to governance. But another rank, I suppose you'd say, of clergy are the archdeacons. And the archdeacons, well, remember I said that the job of the deacon was to serve the church. The job of the archdeacon is to serve the diocese. But they are ordained as priests. They are basically the bishop's chief bulldogs, the bishop's chief enforcers. You know how you have in the mafia, the Don will never get involved in anything criminal directly. He'll have other people there to do the dirty work and to knock off people. Well, it's the same with the archdeacons. That's their job, to give a bishop plausible deniability. So the archdeacons enforce the legal aspects of the Church of England. The archdeacons are senior clergy, so they have the same, they're permitted to do the same sorts of things that any priest can do in terms of taking services, but their job is to basically be the bishop's enforcers on the ground, to be the bishop's senior servants in that way of going out and administering. So they are important, which is why they're given the title venerable, not because of their age, but because we had this title, we had to give it to somebody. Does that make sense there? Good. So how does a thing run? So I've described to you the kind of thing that you would see, again, if you remember back to your youth, the Professor Brainstorm books or the Heath Robinson machinery, very complicated, lots of independence. Remember, parishes independent, diocese independent, cathedrals independent. How does this work? Because actually, it's a trick question, what is the Church of England? Because there actually is no one body called the Church of England. Legally, it doesn't exist. It's rather a federation with various authority structures of no end of independent charities. So how do we make it all run? Well, again, we'll start from the most church bit of the Church of England up. At a local level, the parish was always run by the parish priest. And as I say, with the emergence of PCCs, parochial church councils as well, that's who runs the parish alongside the priest. So I, as the parish priest, am chair of the PCC. The PCC, with the church wardens, are elected by you in the parish, and together we run the parishes. I would tend to take more responsibility for the services, putting on the services, who's going to preach and all of that. And the PCC tends to take more responsibility over the buildings and the mission of the church, getting more people into the church as well. But it's blur. We overlap a lot on those things, but fundamentally, that's sort of how it works. And this idea of having an elected committee from a parish is replicated all the way through the various bits of the hierarchy of the Church of England. Remember, I talked about deaneries, these groupings, regional groupings. They have a synod. What is a synod? Well, a synod is a group of people elected to be, by parishes, to be on the deanery synod. So we have a diocesan synod. Well, who's on the diocesan synod? Well, it's elected by the members of the deanery synod who goes on to the diocesan synod. Anybody can stand for that. I'm looking at Christopher. I'm right on that, aren't I? That it's a deanery synod who are the electorate. I think I am. Anyway. And then we come to general synod. We'll come to later. Who elects them? Well, again, the deanery synod reps are the people who mainly elect those. So to go through the sense of governance, it is a kind of democratic governance that we have, but with checks and balances in it as well, because we have these historic rights of the clergy, which have to be balanced out with all of this. The deanery, well, you've all elected certain people to be on your deanery synod. The deanery synod meets in our deanery about twice a year. It used to meet 3 or 4 times a year. And then I became the rural dean and I reduced it to twice a year, which is the legal minimum. So we meet together, we have people talking, and we make some decisions when asked about, are we going to merge these parishes and that kind of stuff. And I, as rural dean, well, I sit on the interview panel for clergy who are going to be interviewed for posts in this deanery. So it gives a bit of a local part of that, as does other local reps. So the deanery is the kind of on-the-ground interface between the parish and the diocese. The diocese, well, we have the diocesan synod. Oh, sorry, before I go on to the diocesan synod, the other oddness of this kind of democratic thing, remember I said checks and balances are basically democratic, but also we have to have a nod to the historic rights of the clergy. Well, all these synods have different houses. Now, unlike the House of Lords and the House of Commons, the houses of synods sit together, but they're separately elected. The House of Clergy is elected by the clergy. The House of Laity is elected by the laity. This is really dull, but do you get some kind of sense of how this is all working? So every synod is elected, the clergy elect their reps, the laity elect their reps. So we have the deanery synod. We also have a diocesan synod who are made up of elected members. Clergy elect, the laity elect, and then also a little tiny house of bishops, which in our little tin pot diocese, but charming, has a single occupant, which is the House of Bishops, with one bishop in it, our lovely diocesan bishop. Now, in other big boy dioceses like Oxford or Lichfield, they'll have 4 or 5 bishops in their diocese because they're geographically they're not geographically much bigger. They've got larger populations and they're richer, but we only have one. So our House of Bishops is little tiny, but most House of Bishops will be 3, 4, 5 bishops. That gets important in some voting, but that's basically how it is. And the diocesan synod oversees the governance of the diocese. It's involved in the setting of budgets and things like that. So we have a kind of synodical, which is another way of saying elected body, governance system in the Church of England. And that goes all the way up to General Synod, which is the national body. And that has 3 houses: bishops, a mixture of the diocesan bishops who are there by right of their office, and some other elected bishops. It has the House of Clergy, and it has also the House of Laity. It's slightly more complicated than that, but that'll do. So it has these 3 houses, and that it would be around 450 people elected across the country. We send 3 clergy, because we're little and tin pot, and 3 laity to General Synod, one of whom, as I said earlier, is me. And we meet together twice a year, or if the wheels are coming off, 3 times a year, and we vote on the large issues that affect the whole Church of England. Big financial issues, issues which may be to do with changing of doctrine or not. And the measures, which is what bits of legislation are called in General Synod, the measures that we pass in the end become law, the law of the land. General Synod, basically, Parliament back in the day delegated its authority for the running of the Church of England to the General Synod. So it's a statutory body. It's a parliamentary body. It creates law. It's a very odd thing because of that. But because of that, any measure, which is the Church's word for an Act of Parliament, any measure that goes to Synod has to come a number of times, like bills do in Parliament, have to be debated, and they have to pass in all the houses. Remember, in the House of Commons, in our Parliament, a bill has to pass through the Commons and through the Lords. Well, on General Synod, then things have to be passed in all 3 houses, the laity, the clergy and the bishops. We normally vote together, but sometimes we might vote separately just to make sure that that really has passed in all 3 houses. Is that all making any sense? Christopher was also a member of General Synod for ages. Those of you who have a long history in this parish may remember one Julie Maxwell. I don't know if she was called Julie Maxwell when she was here, who lived just up on Nash Bank. She's also currently a member of General Synod. So we do our little bit here in our little corner to send people to General Synod. Are we happy with that? Complicated. I told you it was complicated. Yes, Sydney.
I'm intrigued, actually, because when Wales became disestablished from the Church of England, Wales doesn't call its church the Church of Wales. It's called the Church in Wales.
Yes.
And I think that's very important, because we get, I personally, anyway, my vision of everything you're talking about gets clouded. Because I ask myself, what's it got to do with God? And what's it got
Yes.
to do with faith?
Yes.
Maybe you're coming on.
Well, that comes back to the caveat, really. I think you're right. Just so others who couldn't hear, Sydney was making the point that when so the Church of England used to cover England and Wales. So the Church of England would have had as English diocese Bangor and places like that. You can imagine how well that goes down. So the church, the Welsh church, if I can put it in those terms, disestablished around 1910, wasn't it? I can't remember the exact date. They disestablished at that stage and became independent, and were then are known as the Church of Wales. So it's not the church in Wales, it's the church, no, other way around. Sorry, I got that entirely wrong. So we're the Church of England, but they're the church in Wales. And that distinction, although it's only a small word, is quite telling. Because, as Sydney said, you listen to all that I'm saying and you ask yourself the question, what on earth has it got to do with God? Well, one has to answer at times, it would appear very little. And that's because the Church of England, and we'll come to the state church thing in a second, is this strange body. But the church in Wales, not the Church of Wales, the church in Wales, because it's freed from those legal constraints that the Church of England is still there, has much greater freedom and has a much greater sense of being a church. It's just a church that happens to be in Wales, where we are the Church of England. And so there's a kind of difference, nuance in all of that. What's it got to do with God? Well, it amuses him, I'm sure. Yes. When does convocation come in? I was trying to avoid convocations. Okay, so just to answer that question, another further word you very rarely hear used, convocations, but they do exist. So, back in the day, by which I'm talking prior to the Reformation, the Canterbury had a convocation of clergy, which is the forerunner of the House of Clergy in General Synod, and York had a convocation of clergy, which was the forerunner of the House of Clergy in General Synod. Now, actually, just to really confuse things entirely, General Synod is actually the convocation of York plus the laity of York and the convocation of Canterbury plus the laity of Canterbury meeting together at the same time with the same agenda, sitting in the same body. But actually, we are separate, and at very few times we do separate out. So the convocation is basically what we would call the House of Clergy now of York and of Canterbury. So it's a historic term. It is still used from time to time, but I've kind of ignored it because it's already complicated enough. But that's what a convocation is. Literally, it's a calling together. It's the Latin, we call together the clergy. The bishops call together the clergy. Oh, one other thing I should have said about, well, we'll come to it now. Come to the idea of being a state church. This is to pick up your point. So we've mentioned diocesan bishops, and we've mentioned General Synod. We've spoken about how General Synod operates really with power delegated to do it from Parliament. We've talked about how it passes measures which then become the law of the land, signed off by the monarch, having all the authority of an act of Parliament. But there is also more than that, because you will have noticed 26 of our bishops also sit in Parliament itself in the House of Lords. So our bishop, for instance, sits in the House of Lords. And this is where we start to bleed over into the realm of being a state church or an established church, as well as being a church. This is the Church of England now coming very much to the fore. Because as we've seen, the story of the Church of England is closely tied to the story of the monarchy, and particularly initially Henry VIII and his lack of children. And the king remains the supreme governor of the Church of England. Some bishops still have roles in the royal household. Did you know that the Bishop of Hereford is also the clerk of the closet of the king? So at times he will go, I don't know, and sort out King Charles's wardrobe or something. But he has certain roles. Actually, what he does do, one of his roles is to appoint the king for the bishops who are being made a diocesan bishop or have other roles and therefore need to swear oaths of loyalty directly to the king. Going back a couple of bishops to Bishop Richard Frith, it took a little while for him, after his announcements, to become the Bishop of Hereford. Why? Because the Queen was up in Balmoral. Do I mean that? I do mean that, which, as you know, is in Scotland. Well, the established church in Scotland is Presbyterian. It doesn't have bishops. The Queen, when she crosses the border, becomes Presbyterian. She can't appoint new bishops and swear in bishops because she's being very Presbyterian then. So we had to wait for her to come south into England before she could appoint bishops again. This is part of the quirks of being a state church. So 26 diocesan bishops, the most senior, either because they are in the big diocese, Canterbury, York, Winchester, and one or two, London, and another one is Durham, well remembered, the other one, either because they're one of the 5 senior bishops in the Church of England, or by term of seniority, they've been in post longer, they come in to the House of Lords. And so they're part of the nation's legislature. The other quirk of being a state church, we have Church of England schools. Now, these schools were set up by parishes. If you're ever interested, go into the vestry and you'll see the big charity boards that are up there talking about money given to established schools. There's similar boards in Mordiford as well. But now, these schools are run by the state, but they're still governed very much by the church. So they have to have church inspections, known as science inspections, to check that their religious education is good and Christian. They also have the parish priests sitting on the board of governors. Oh, joy of joy, I sit on 2. Well, I don't at the moment, but normally I sit on 2 because it's a church school. We also appoint foundation governors so that you have church governors. So even though it's paid by the state, the buildings still remain the property of the diocese. And should a school close, the property reverts back to the diocese. So when people chunter and moan, why do we have church schools? What's the point of them? Well, one of the points is that we've allowed the schools to occupy the buildings all this time rent-free. And would you like us to start paying rent? To start charging rent now? So the Church of England put a lot of money in to set these things up. But it's another example of this close link between church and state. At one stage, it was the church wardens, and along with the parish priests, who will be in charge of giving out dole and poor relief. You used to go to the church wardens with your tattiest clothes on and ask for some sort of help. It was basically the social services of its time. Now that's all been taken into the welfare state, but that was originally how it all worked. So we've had this very close link with the state. Before I go on to the broad church, though, you see how we are there? So it does have its oddities, things like, as you said, the king appointing bishops now. Yes, on the advice of Parliament, but nonetheless, it's the king who appoints the bishops. And so you have this strange kind of legal side to the Church of England. We have faculties to do anything which a legal documents. My license begins, be it known unto the whole world that I, Richard, Lord Bishop of Hereford, by divine permission, and so on and so forth. It's all there because of this established state link with monarchy that goes back all the way. Are we there with that? We are coming through. We're getting towards the end. A broad church. So that's the national church. It's all, as you say, what's it got to do with God? Well, let's go back a little bit closer then to the foundations as we sort of come towards a close on this. One thing I'd say now in the Church of England is that actually, if you open the door of a parish church on a Sunday morning anywhere in the country and you walk in to a service, you won't actually know what that service will look like. Because remember I said about all these civil wars? Well, we had this settlement, we're going to be broad. Remember I said about this tension of how Catholic are we, how Reformed are we? Well, some churches you'll go in and they will look to you pretty much Roman Catholic. The priest will be wearing robes. I wear vestments here. The priest will be wearing robes, but you may have the use of incense in the building as well. You'll have the services chanted in many ways. It will look very Roman Catholic. Other churches, well, you go in and you think you might be in a Baptist church. The building is much plainer, none of the ornamentation of the Anglo-Catholics, and instead of a priest at the front looking splendid in vestments, you'll have a worship band at the front with drums, guitar and the rest of it, and a big screen with the words being projected, and a stronger emphasis not on communion, the Mass, but a stronger emphasis on preaching, the Word. So we have that kind of tension that's still built in, and we don't have any kind of unifying factor. We don't have the Book of Common Prayer having to be used in all churches anymore. It's much wider. And also, and that's a very urban experience of the breadth, because actually we in rural areas, well, we have to be there for everybody. You know, people aren't going to drive and travel in the same way they do in the cities to go to church. So we tend to be a little bit more broader here. We also tend to be smaller here. But there are big churches in the Church of England. Yes, I looked up the other day, the median size of a congregation in the Church of England was 24, wasn't it? Or 23 or 24. But if you go into some of the larger cities, as you know, often we do, we go to church, the church that we go to when we go to London, well, that will have a congregation. The last time we went there, 400 or 500 people for their evening service. They have 2 other services in the morning as well. And that church is predominantly, I would suggest, the majority would be certainly 35 and under, if not 30 or under. So that's our experience of church in the Church of England here is rather different from the urban setting. It's part of that breadth that we have. A quick note about money, because I haven't got my watch. Gosh, how long have I gone on? Just a very quick word. Who pays for what? I've said some of this already, so you can read through this. Basically, the parish pays for the building, and the parish pays a contribution towards the running costs of the diocese, which provides you with clergy and all of that. In our diocese, each benefice, each group of parishes needs to contribute about 60, 65, something like that, £1,000 a year to pay its share of the central costs of employing clergy, housing clergy, legal stuff, all of that. The diocese will have some investments of its own, and if a vicarage is sold, the proceeds go to the diocese. But in the end, the dioceses themselves are losing, across the Church of England, around 60 to 65 million pounds a year. So where does that money come from? Well, some of that money comes from selling investments, but a lot of it comes from the church commissioners. So the church commissioners will make up some of the shortfall. The church commissioners are another separate independent body with enormous endowment of about £11 billion given by Queen Anne, basically, with some other bits added later on. And the church commissioners pay for bishops and they pay for the cathedral staff, but they also bail out dioceses if needs be. They pour money, about a 30 odd million a year, they pour into the poorest parishes of the Church of England so that they can have their own clergy, and they help pay for pensions for the clergy and things like that. And we're dealing with big money here. So over a 3-year term, the Church Commissioners will give into the Church of England about £1.63 billion to keep the show on the road. I'm not going to say anything about the Anglican Communion because you can read that on there, and there's not, I'll just say that. And I'm not going to say much by way of conclusion either because I've just looked at the time. Just to say, though, that when we say, what is the Church of England? It's a kind of trick question in a way because there is no single one body. We are a federation of churches, legally constituted, legally bound to each other, legally under authority. But we are fundamentally a collection of about 16,000 parishes plus other organisations with a bishop leading us, but having an elected structure of governance, of synods, where we elect people. So we're led by bishops, but we're democratically governed. That we are a broad church where worship can look very different in different churches on a Sunday morning. But in the end, what the Church of England is it's the local parish church, embedded in its own parish, turned to by people Sunday by Sunday, turned to by people to be married, to be baptised, or to have their funerals. The Church of England are so many church schools as well. The Church of England, in the end, is the local church. And so, to go back to Sydney's question, what's this got to do with God? The bigger you go up into the institution, I'm tempted to say less and less. But if you remember the Church of England is actually the parishes, then I'd hope the answer is quite a lot. I've gone on long. Questions, if there are any, before Mary wakes you up with caffeine and with chocky bickies. Any questions? In which case I shall take that as stunned silence. I knew it was a vast subject, so apologies. I must get myself a clock. We're going a little bit too long there, but hopefully that's given you an idea. And just to remind you, all these talks, as I say, we are putting up onto the internet. Class dismissed. Thank you.